Hey, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing my January wrap-up. In the month of January, I read a total of 18 books, which included 5 manga or graphic novels and then 13 novels. I also happened to DNF 9 different books this month. When I said 2024 was going to be my year of DNFing and not really caring, I really took that to heart. So I DNF'd 9 different things this month. It actually affected my video schedule a little bit because I was originally going to be working on a video this month that was like reading booktubers' favorites of 2023, and like that didn't happen because I ended up DNFing too many things. But instead, the videos that I did work on this month include, a reading new thrillers vlog, which I had a really great time working on. I also did a reading vlog right at the start of this month that was reading some of my 2024 arcs. And then I did 3 different Winterween vlogs right at the start of January because I hosted Winterween again for the first time in a year or two. And that was really nice. It was really fun to be able to bring Winterween back this year. I had an amazing time with it and I read a lot of really great things. Over on Patreon this month, I did make an exclusive video with my sister where we talked about our favorite movies and TV shows of 2023. The video is like 45 minutes long, like we literally couldn't shut up. And then also on my Patreon this month, I did do an extended version of the goals video that you saw where I talk about even more video plans and I talk about some of my personal goals for this year. So if you'd like to see either of those Patreon exclusive videos, I'll have that link down below as well. And then the last thing that I want to plug before we get into the books is that in the month of January, my Trova trip to Italy got confirmed. And if you haven't heard about this yet, I'm going to be hosting my first ever Trova trip to Italy. And if you would like to join us, I would love for you to join us. Now I only have 12 available spots left on the trip. All of the early bird spots have sold out, and so there's only 12 spots remaining. We have a really exciting and packed itinerary for Italy. Everybody joining on this trip is so lovely, and I can't wait to meet all of them and travel with them this year. And I would love for you to join us on that, so if you would like to see all of the information about Italy, I will have it linked down below, and I highly encourage you to check it out. So you might be wondering, which 9 books did I DNF this month? Some of these are definitely books that I can see myself getting back to at some point, and then some of these, I'm not too sure if I have any interest in picking them back up again in the future. I mean, some of the books you did see me DNF during Winterween, like The Very Secret Society of Irregular Witches. I think with this one, I am just not the proper audience for this book, and I just couldn't get invested. There was too many like spells and just things that I did not care about. I also ended up DNFing Leech during Winterween. This is another one where the writing style was just taking me so much to get into, like I just couldn't get invested and I thought it was so slow. I also DNF'd If We Were Villains at like over 100 pages in, which this is actually a reread for me. I actually did read this book a number of years ago and I really enjoyed it, but I do plan to get back into this at some point, but this was another DNF that I had this month. Shortly after Winterween, I ended up DNFing The Leftover Woman. This is one that I got about 50 to 100 pages into before I just realized I'm actually not that interested in the overall plot of this book. I thought I knew what this one was about, but I think I was misinformed and I just don't really have any interest for what the story is actually about. I was also trying to get into more nonfiction this month, as I've discussed that that's something that I'm interested in doing this year. And so I tried to read You Could Make This Place Beautiful, but I only got maybe about 100 pages into this before I decided to DNF. This just isn't the kind of book for me. I don't know, like I was getting irritated with the style of the way that she was telling her story, and I just didn't want to have to rate this book badly because it's a nonfiction. It feels very personal to this author, so I was just like, yeah, I don't think I'm the right audience for this. I'm just gonna DNF it. And then I was working on the video of reading BookTube's favorite books of 2023, and I DNF'd a number of books for that video, including The Wishing Game, which sadly, no, this book is just not for me. I was getting so irritated in the first 60 pages with this protagonist. I just could not get into the writing in this, and then also the main character was just driving me absolutely nuts. I also ended up DNFing Tom Lake for that video as well, which is such a bummer because this is one that I really wanted to love. This is another one that I just feel like I don't know if I'm the audience for this book. Like I was just getting really easily bored, and maybe it was just my mindset at the time. Like maybe this is another book that I could pick back up in the future and maybe enjoy it again, but for now it's gonna be a DNF for me. Then Hello Beautiful was a book that I was gonna be reading for that video as well, and this ended up being a DNF because I got so bored after 60 pages. It's like nothing was happening. I feel like sometimes literary fiction like this I just have to be in a very specific mood for, and I just was not in the mood to read this month. And then the last DNF that I had this month was Chain Gang All-Stars, which I was also reading for that video. This one I only got about 30 pages in before I realized I wasn't really clicking with the writing style, but this is another temporary DNF for me because I'm definitely gonna come back to this at some point in the future, like maybe even in the month of February, I don't know. I just have to be in the right mood for something like this, and it just wasn't really, I wasn't clicking with it right when I picked it up. So this is a temporary DNF for now. Yeah, these were most of the books that I DNF'd this month. I have just become ruthless with my DNFs in 2024, and I can't be sorry about it. So I thought I'd begin with the 5 different manga and graphic novels that I was reading this month. The first book that I read this year was Heartstopper Volume 5. A huge shout out to Jenna for sending this to me off my Amazon wishlist, but like, Heartstopper! This series is one of my all-time favorite graphic novel series. We follow Nick and Charlie as they are, you know, young adults coming of age. They're discovering things about themselves and feelings about each other. I just adore this series so much, and this volume was no different. I think I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I also ended up reading this one called A Guest in the House during Winterween. This one is kind of like a horror mystery graphic novel where we're following this woman who has recently just married this man who's a dentist, and he has this daughter, but she's starting to wonder if her husband is telling her the truth about his previous wife and what actually happened to her, and there's like some mysterious circumstances around how she died, and so she's trying to figure out the truth, and she's also dealing with a lot of loneliness and depression. While she's mostly, you know, living alone, taking care of his younger daughter, it's taking a big toll on her mentally. I thought the artwork in this graphic novel was absolutely stunning, and I thought the story was really special. I feel like the mental illness representation in this graphic novel was done really well. I think I ended up giving this one around a 3.5 stars. The only reason why I knocked it down a little bit was because I thought the ending was pretty confusing, to the point where like the last 3 or 4 pages of this book just go completely off the rails, and it just gets very confusing, and I feel like it would almost require me to reread the entire thing just to understand the ending. And then I ended up reading Bloom, and this is a graphic novel that I've been wanting to read for a few years now. Look at how cute the art style is in this. It's all tinted with this like kind of teal and black and white coloring, and this one's so cute. We're following these 2 young boys who are working in a bakery together. We're following our main protagonist Ari, and he has recently just graduated from high school, and he's wanting to, you know, get out of this small town and go on a tour with his band, but his parents own this bakery and they're like, we really need your help. So in the summertime they hire this other boy at the bakery so that Ari can teach him how to like eventually take over his spot at the bakery. But then over the summertime that they spend together working in this bakery together, they start to like catch feelings, and this feels very like queer coming of age. Oh my gosh, this graphic novel was so cute. It meant everything to me. It was 5 stars. I loved it. If you like Heartstopper, or even like Aristotle and Dante discovered the secrets of the universe, I think you would love this. It was just so cute and so cozy. All of the scenes in the bakery just like really warmed my heart, and it made me want to go and visit. Like, it was just such a cute little bakery, and like their family was so sweet. I just loved all of the characters in this. And then I ended up reading Betwixt. I ended up getting this one from my library because I thought it was the new Junji Ito horror manga. And what I realized is this is actually a collection of short stories. So there's 6 short stories in this, and Junji Ito actually didn't do any of the 6 short stories. He actually only wrote the foreword in this. And then there's 3 different Japanese artists that made manga in this, and then there was 3 American artists who made manga in this. And so it's interesting because you can start the book from either side, because, you know, the Japanese manga is read in reverse, like typically kind of like backwards to how English is, and then on the front side you have the English manga that's read straight forward just like English, so you're flipping the pages like this. So it's like you get kind of caught in the middle, so then it tells you to like flip over the book and start from the other side, which in theory I think is really cool and a really fun concept. But I also think I went into this with the wrong expectation, because for some reason I thought I was just going to be reading a Junji Ito short story collection, and that was not this. And unfortunately I didn't really end up liking any of these short stories. I just thought they were all very shallow and basic and just not that scary. So this collection, I gave it 2 stars personally, but I do like the idea and like the concept here that these authors were trying to do. Like, I think it's really cool, but unfortunately none of these stories landed for me, so it was 2 stars. And then the last manga that I read this month was Killing Stalking Volume 2, and this one is actually manhwa because it's Korean, it's not Japanese, and it's actually in full color, and it's read forward, which is not like manga, because manga is typically read in reverse. I don't even want to recommend this series to you because it's so graphic and explicit and sexual and just not the typical usual thing that I read. I don't know if this series is categorized as like horror, or if it's categorized as like dark romance, or what this is categorized as. I don't know, but I really loved this. Like, I'm so embarrassed to say how much I fucking loved this. Like, I love it. I don't know what it is about this series. I'm just so engaged. It's like a train wreck that you can't pull your eyes away from, and you know that this is like awful. Like, their situation is awful. These 2 characters are so toxic, but like there's just something about it that keeps bringing me back. Like, I just keep wanting to come back to it. And I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and I am just dying. Like, I am dying to read the 3rd volume. Like, this is so good. But just remember, if you picked this up because of me, no you didn't. I did not recommend this to you, okay? This book is just so sexually dark and graphic and violent, and just, it's a lot. It's a lot. So check for trigger warnings for this one, because holy crap. So the first book that I read in the month of January was Expiration Dates by Rebecca Surley. This one is actually an ARC copy that I have, and this one goes on sale in March. This was the first book that I read for the reading vlog that I was working on right at the beginning of this year, where I read some 2024 ARCs. In this story, this one's kind of like a contemporary fiction kind of book where we're following this woman named Daphne. The universe will like give her little slips of paper that will have like a man's name on it and a time next to it, like an amount of days or weeks or months or whatever. And that little paper will tell her like how long she's gonna be with each guy that she's with. So like she'll go on a date and it'll say like Matthew, 2 weeks, or like something like that. And she'll be like, oh, like my next boyfriend's gonna be named Matthew and we're gonna be together for 2 weeks. She goes and meets this guy named Jake and she gets a piece of paper that just says Jake and then there's no expiration date next to it. And so she's like, oh my God, like could he be the one? I thought this would be really interesting, you know, like I thought it kind of sounded similar to like a Black Mirror episode that I really love. And I was like, oh my gosh, like what a cool, unique concept. But like, no, I hated absolutely everything about this book. Like, I'm so sorry. This book was just not for me. I did not like it. The main character drove me absolutely nuts. Like one of the most frustrating main characters I've ever read in a book in such a long time. I also just thought the writing in this book just wasn't very good. Like the writing just felt so basic, so shallow. It really just lacked any depth. None of the characters felt real to me. They all felt like one-dimensional cardboard cutouts. I also thought that I couldn't dislike this book anymore until we got to that ending, and then I was just mad. Like then I just wanted to like throw this book, like yeet it across the room because I was like, what the fuck was that ending? Like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, am I supposed to be happy about this? I don't know what I was supposed to feel during this book, but clearly I wasn't feeling the right things because this was 1 star for me. I can't believe that I already had a 1 star in the year of 2024. Like, can you believe? And then the second book that I ended up reading this month was The Band. This one is a literary fiction novel where we're following this Korean boy band, and the oldest member of this K-pop group gets canceled after his latest solo single leads to some controversy. This book should have been right up my alley, you know, because I am a K-pop girly. Like, I really love K-pop. I thought this would be so fun, and I thought this would have lots of great commentary on K-pop and how idols are treated and like the unrealistic expectations of K-pop idols. I don't know, there was something about this book I just did not connect with the writing at all. I thought the writing was so slow, and this is definitely one of those books where there's like a million footnotes at the bottom of the story on each page, and that also just kind of drove me nuts because I was like, I don't think there's a real reason to have all of these footnotes. I just didn't connect with any of the characters. Like the writing just felt so odd to me because I always felt disconnected from whatever was happening. Like we really don't get into the head of like any of the characters really, but I just never felt connected to any of the characters, and I never felt really connected to anything that was going on. Even though this story is called The Band and it's supposed to be about this band, I don't even feel like the story's really about the band. I don't know, this one was just a huge miss for me personally, and it was 2 stars. And then I read Kill for Me, Kill for You, which this one is also an ARC copy. This one goes on sale March 19th, and this one takes place in New York City, and we're following these 2 women who are strangers to each other, but after they meet one night, they decide that they're gonna make this plan to kill for each other because they've both experienced such awful things in their lives and they never got justice for what happened in their lives. So they decide that they're gonna use each other and help to kill for each other to get revenge against these people that have wronged them. And then at the same time, we're also following from the perspective of this woman named Ruth, who is living with her husband when she gets attacked by this man in the middle of the night, shortly after the police discover that this man is a serial killer and he's been going around killing women, but for some reason he didn't kill her. And so then they're trying to figure out like, why did he leave her alive? Like, why didn't he kill her? And so this story kind of jumps back and forth between these 2 storylines that are happening with these 2 women who are planning to kill for each other, and then with this other woman named Ruth. And this book was so freaking good. It definitely has that like, you know, strangers on a train trope, you know, where like a stranger is meeting another stranger and they're gonna plan to murder for each other. But I feel like this book did it in such a way that felt so fresh and like different. I just really loved the writing in this. Like this was one of those thrillers where I was eating this shit up. Like I found it really hard to put down because the pacing was just so fast. It's like one of those books where every single chapter just ends on a little cliffhanger and just keeps you engaged the entire time. I just had a really great time with this. I was surprised by this book from beginning to end, and I gave this book 4.5 stars. I highly recommend that you check this one out when it comes out in March. It was so fun. To kick off Winterween, I actually started with the book Dead of Winter by Darcy Coates. This is one that I listened to entirely on audio, and I was nervous going into this one because my previous experience with Darcy Coates is that I had like a 1 or 2 star book from her. Like I just really didn't like the first book that I read from this author, but this one ended up being such a fun time. In the story, we're following this woman named Krista who joins this group of people who are going to be heading deep into the Rocky Mountains, but then this snowstorm ends up happening and they have to take shelter in this little cabin, and then shit starts hitting the fan and going sideways because their tour guide goes missing. And then they all start freaking out when they find their tour guide's severed head on top of a stick outside of the cabin. And then this ends up becoming one of those books where, you know, people start getting picked off one by one. They're trying to figure out which one of them could be the killer, and it's very exciting and very intense. There's a really great snowy atmosphere throughout this book, and honestly, Dead of Winter is everything that I was hoping and wanting One by One by Ruth Ware to be. I love the the idea of like a murder mystery whodunit taking place in the snow. Everything's more isolated and stormy and it feels so scary because you don't know who you can trust. And I just thought this book was so good. It was so engaging. The entire time the book was happening, I was so engaged with the mystery, trying to figure out what could be going on. And this was a great time. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, which gives me so much hope because I know now that I can enjoy a book from Darcy Coates, and so I can't wait to check out more from this author now. And then for Winterween, I also ended up reading Payback's a Witch. So Payback's a Witch is a sapphic romance that follow these 2 girls who are both witches, and our protagonist Emmy, she's gonna be coming back to her small town after she's been gone for a long time. She finds out that this girl, Talia, has recently had a breakup with this guy named Gareth, and then she finds out that her best friend, this other girl named Lyndon, has also been dating this guy Gareth, and that he was like dating them both at the same time and that they had no idea. So then this book is kind of about how they're gonna be getting payback against this man. And then there's also a bunch of other different like family drama and like things happening in this small town. This one ended up being just okay for me. I think I gave this one around 3 stars because I thought the chemistry between these 2 women was actually really cute. Like I did like the chemistry between them, but like every other aspect of this book just really bored me. I just found some of the fantasy elements of this book were just a little bit too boring and just like went over my head, and I just didn't really care about some of the fantasy elements of the story. And then all the stuff that was happening in their small town during the story, like I could not give a fuck about the plot of this book outside of the romance. Like the romance was cute and the romance kept me flipping the pages, you know, like the romance was interesting, but the rest of it I could care less. So this one was around a 3 star. It was very forgettable. And then during Winterween, I also read No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. This is one that I was so excited to read because of how much I loved What Lies in the Woods by this author. And this one is another thriller mystery novel where we're following these 3 sisters. So 14 years ago, their parents were murdered, and the oldest sister, Emma, was like accused of murdering her parents. And now 14 years later, we're following Emma as she discovers that she's pregnant and her husband has just lost his job and she has no option but to return to the house that her parents left her, like, you know, the same house that they were murdered in. And so her husband doesn't even know about a lot of this history with her family. Like he doesn't know that she was suspected of murdering her own parents. And in this story, we follow from the perspective of all 3 sisters. Some of them are done in flashback chapters and some of them are done in present day. But I don't know, for me personally, I thought this thriller was just okay. I thought it started off really strong, you know, and I was really invested in the beginning after the first 100 pages or so. But then somewhere towards the middle, I just feel like this book gets bogged down by these flashback chapters that just became so repetitive and so boring. I also feel like a lot of the revelations at the end of this book were just kind of predictable and obvious. Like there was nothing about this book that really shocked me. I just feel like this is a thriller that has a similar premise to stuff that I've read before, which was truly unfortunate. I mean, I still gave this one 3 stars. Like it's an enjoyable thriller. It was still an interesting time and I still liked the characters, but it just didn't bring anything new to the table. So I gave this one 3 stars. It was fine. And then during Winterween, I also read The Skin Was Once Mine by Eric LaRocca. And this one is a horror book. This one is actually also an ARC copy. This book publishes in the month of April, but this one is a collection of 4 short stories from Eric LaRocca. And if you know me and my taste in horror books, I love Eric LaRocca as an author. I think his horror books are truly some of the most like disturbing and gross shit that I've ever read in my life, but like I love his writing. I just keep coming back to his books because I really do love his writing. And this one was no different. I think this book was 5 stars for me. Like I think this was my favorite short story horror collection from Eric LaRocca so far because I really loved every single short story in this collection. I think a lot of what these stories have in common is grief. Like grief is definitely the main horrific thing that ties these stories all together, but also like body horror. Like there was an exceptional amount of body horror in a few of these that I was like, oh my gosh, it was truly disturbing, like the kind of shit that gets under your skin. But I think for sure my favorite short story in this collection is the 3rd story that's called All the Parts of You That Won't Easily Burn. Dude, what the heck? Like that one was some of the most disturbing body horror I think I've ever read in my life. Like I was disgusted while I was reading that one, but also just so captivated. And then I also really liked the first short story in this collection that's called This Skin Was Once Mine, that's like named after the collection. I thought that one was so good too and just so powerful. I was just very impressed by this, as I usually am with Eric LaRocca, but like wow, this one was incredible. If you usually like his books, I definitely think you should check this one out when it publishes in April because damn! And then during Winterween, I also read Mapping the Interior by Stephen Graham Jones, which this one is a horror novella. This one is a really thought-provoking horror novella that's about this young boy who's about like 12 to 13 years old, and he thinks that he sees the ghost of his father standing in their living room. And that's really what this book ends up being about, but I feel like the main takeaway that I had from this book that still has me thinking about it a lot is the way that he would talk about how badly and desperately he wants to protect his younger brother, and how sometimes it's really scary when there are outside forces and things in the world that you cannot control, and how scary that is as an older sibling to know that you can't really protect your younger sibling from everything in the world. That really struck a chord with me and just hit me on a personal note, and I loved that about this. I thought the writing in this was so freaking beautiful, and I ended up giving this one 4.5 stars. It's definitely a new favorite from Stephen Graham Jones. Oh my gosh, I just think his writing in this is so good. Then the last thing that I read for Winterween was Bloom by Delilah S. Dawson, and yes, I also think it's pretty hilarious that I read 2 books this month that are called Bloom. Was it intentional? No, but I'm happy about it because I liked both of these a lot. So Bloom is a sapphic horror novel that I had never even heard of before my friend Riley put this as her #1 favorite book of 2023 in her best books video, and I was like, wow, like what is that? Our main character, her name is Rosemary, and she meets this woman Ash who's like selling cupcakes and like soaps at the farmer's market, and then it's kind of like this very intense kind of like insta-love connection that Rosemary has with Ash. Like she just immediately gets kind of obsessed with her, and then a lot of this story takes place at the farmer's market where they first met, and then also on Ash's farm. And this story was just very interesting to read because our protagonist Rosemary, at times she could come off like so pretentious because she's definitely one of those people that's like, I have an English degree and because of that I'm better than you and I know more words than you do. And she could just be a little bit much at times, and like she was obviously very like instantly like obsessed with this girl. But this story was interesting to read because for the first like 100 pages or so, it really just reads like an insta-lovey romance kind of book, or like I wasn't really sure where the horror was gonna come in. And this book is so short, you know, it's barely over 200 pages, so I was like, okay, like what's gonna happen? Like when's it gonna happen? And then after 100 pages in, like, oh my gosh, shit really just starts to hit the fan. I ended up giving this one 4 stars, and the only reason why I got 4 stars instead of 5 stars for me is because I did think some of this was a little bit predictable, at least with like the horror elements and like where the story ended up going. Like I didn't really find anything at the end of this book super shocking. Like it was pretty obvious to me once you start realizing like what's going down, like what ended up happening. But also, however, there was one scene at the very end, like the final chapter of this book definitely did surprise me a little bit, and I was like, oh shit, like I really liked the ending of this. And overall, I just had a really fun time with this. Like I was able to easily read this all within one night because I couldn't put it down. I just thought it was so interesting and the characters were so interesting. And then the next book that I ended up reading this month was Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, which this was my January Book Troop book club pick, so I'll have that live show linked down below if you missed it and you want to hear more of my thoughts. But like, holy shit, I loved this so fucking much, and I am very happy to let you know that we are starting off the book troop with a freaking 5-star this year. This is possibly like my favorite book that I've ever had for my book club, so like wow, 2024 is off to a great start. And in this book, this one is definitely more of a literary mystery thriller. Like I know it's categorized as like a mystery thriller on Goodreads, but I would say this definitely reads more like literary fiction. So in this story, it takes place in the 1970s, and we're following this character named Pamela, who is the sorority president at the sorority house. And this sorority is inspired by the real life sorority that was targeted by America's first celebrity serial killer. So this entire story is definitely inspired by the Ted Bundy situation and the Ted Bundy case, if you didn't know that. And so our protagonist, Pamela, we're following her on the night of the sorority attack when 4 women in her sorority were like brutally attacked. And she wakes up in the middle of the night, and then she's the only one who sees him as he's leaving. So she's the only one who can identify him as a witness. And then in alternate chapters, we're also following from the perspective of this character named Ruth, and her chapters are taking place in Washington State about 4 years before this attack on the sorority happened. And Ruth was somebody who disappeared from Washington State, and they might be linked by the same person involved. Like the same man might be responsible for both of these cases. And so this was a really interesting and hard-hitting read. I just think this book does an absolutely phenomenal job with pointing out how harmful it is the way that we glamorize these serial killers in our society. And I love the way that this book does not bring any attention to him as the serial killer. It's really cool that he's never even named once throughout the entire book. He's always referred to as the defendant, and it constantly has these amazing quotes because everybody tries to act like he was some kind of crazy mastermind, and he was just so smart and he was so charming. And like this language that we use to describe these awful men who are serial killers is just disgusting, and I love that this book points that out more than any other book that I've ever read. I love the fact that this author decided to name this book Bright Young Women because of the way the judge literally called Ted Bundy a bright young man in the courtroom. Like, how dare you? Like, that's disgusting to call him a bright young man after he's murdered all of these women. Like, that is just absolutely disgusting, and I love that this is such a huge fuck you by naming this book Bright Young Women. I just love everything that this book stands for. This book brought me to tears multiple times. It's just so hard-hitting and so well done. I just highly encourage you to check out this book and read it, and if you need more convincing, I'll have the live show linked down below where I really went into detail with how much I love this. And the next book that I read this month was One of the Good Guys by Armanita Hall. This book is a thriller that kind of also reads a little bit more like a literary thriller. In this story, we're following this guy named Cole who has recently moved from London to this small seaside cottage town. He's recently dealing with a divorce from his wife Mel after they had several IVF attempts fail and they can't have children. And so he moves to this small town and meets this woman named Lenora, who's his new neighbor, who he starts to have this friendship kind of relationship with. And then there are these two young women who are activists who are raising awareness about gendered violence. When they're walking through their town, they go missing, they disappear. And both Cole and Lenora find themselves in the middle of a police investigation. Cole is definitely one of those characters who really genuinely believes that he's like one of the good guys, and it's interesting to read from his perspective because his understanding of feminism and the way that he thinks about women is just a little bit like, I don't know, he definitely gives me the ick, and I think that that's the point. You know, it's such a shame that I didn't end up liking this book very much because I do think this book starts off so strong. I was really invested. I feel like this author does a really great job at like building this slow burn and making her character seem kind of untrustworthy or kind of like what's going on. And then in the second part of this book, we change perspectives, which I also was like, oh, okay, that's interesting. We get a little bit more backstory to some situations. And I thought it was still really interesting, really good. Like this book was on track to get like 4 stars for me. Like I was really enjoying it. But then once we hit the third part of this book, I feel like the plot just kind of completely falls apart because I feel like a lot of the third part of this book just ends up becoming Reddit threads and Twitter posts and text messages and news articles, and it was just so repetitive and boring. I mean, the audiobook was cool because the audiobook had a full cast and it had a lot of sound effects and like cool things happening on it, but at the same time, like the plot just got completely lost in the story. Like there was no story happening. I feel like the social commentary in this book got a little bit heavy-handed towards the end, where it was just kind of like banging you in the head again with the same message over and over again. And it's frustrating because it's like, I don't disagree with the message that this book is trying to say. I just think it's a little bit too heavy-handed, and I appreciate a little bit more subtlety when it comes to messages like this. So I ended up giving this one like 2.5 out of 5 stars. Like it wasn't terrible, but it just wasn't really for me. And you know, after reading a book like Bright Young Women, it was really hard to follow it up with something like this that just didn't hold a candle to how I felt with my emotions in this one. And then I ended up reading The New Couple in 5B by Lisa Unger. This one's also an ARC copy of a thriller that goes on sale March 5th. This is one that I was really excited about because in this story, we're following this couple named Rosie and Chad, and they're going to be inheriting this New York City apartment. The Windermere has this dark history where it's known for all of these like suspicious suicides and deaths that have happened there. A lot of people say that the building is haunted. And then not only are we following the characters Rosie and Chad in the present day, but we also do get some flashback chapters to the 1960s where we're following this other woman named Willa. And I thought this book was just okay. You know, it's really unfortunate because I can't quite put my finger on like what this book was missing, but for some reason this book just didn't really grip me the way that I wanted it to. Thought that I would be absolutely obsessed with this, and I just wasn't. I kept getting distracted while I was reading this. Like I couldn't focus and concentrate on it. I just found the characters to all be pretty stereotypical. Like there were no characters that really stood out to me, and I just feel like I've read books like this before and it just didn't really bring anything new or exciting to the table. I will admit that there was one twist towards the end that I was like, oh, that's pretty cool. Like I didn't see that coming, and I felt pretty dumb for not seeing that plot twist coming because looking back, I feel like that was actually pretty obvious. So the ending did have at least one thing that I was kind of like, oh shit, I mean, that's interesting. But otherwise, I just feel like this was a very generic, like okay thriller. I think this was another 3-star for me. Like it was just very average and I just wanted more from this. And then the last book that I ended up reading this month was Pineapple Street. I ended up listening to this one on audio, and I did get this hardcover from my library as well. And in this one, we are following these 3 women who are all part of the same family, and they're like a very rich and wealthy family. The only way I know how to describe this book is rich white people doing rich white people things. You know, usually I can enjoy a book that's about like rich white people just doing like their rich white people things. You know, usually I can, but for some reason with this one, I just couldn't connect with any of these characters, and a lot of the story just felt very shallow. I mean, I'm not gonna lie, for the first 100 pages or so, I was like, oh, like this is kind of interesting, like there's a lot of family drama and just like things going on. But then as the book carries on, it just becomes so repetitive, and like the family drama is not even that interesting. And like none of the characters are really that interesting, like they're all really shallow. It's almost kind of like embarrassing, like the things that they admit that they don't know about. I just couldn't tell what the author was trying to do with this book, and if I was supposed to like these characters, like am I supposed to find them just kind of like witty and charming and silly and just like silly rich people, or was I supposed to not like them and realize how like some rich people are just so out of touch with the rest of the world? I don't know. And then a lot of the conversations towards the end of the book just felt so cringy and like so over the top to me. I also just felt like once we reached the ending of this book, I was like, oh, that's it? Like what? Like what is this story? Like there really is no plot in this book. This really is just like slice of life of like rich people doing rich people things, and the drama is not even that interesting. I don't know, maybe this just wasn't for me. I gave it 2 stars. Like I don't really get the hype with with this one. All right, so those are all the books that I read in the month of January. It was quite a bit this month. You'll have to let me know if you've read any of these books. What did you end up thinking about these books? Did you find any new favorites this month? I feel like January did go very well for me because I found so many new favorites, like 5 stars and very high, like 4.5 stars, so I could not be more excited about my January reading. I feel like this year's off to a great start. I just really hope I can keep this energy going for my book club this year, you know what I'm saying? Like, can we get another 5-star for February? That is going to be all for this video, so thank you so much for watching as always, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!